Commander Aura of the Galactic Enforcement Division stood before the massive holographic display, her crystalline features reflecting the swirling data streams that painted humanity's military capabilities across the three-dimensional space. The information was puzzling, almost insulting to her advanced intellect. Here was a species that had barely crawled out of their home system, yet they insisted on maintaining what could only be described as primitive weaponry alongside their newly acquired energy-based armaments. The bridge of the enforcement vessel Nexus Prime hummed with the quiet efficiency of technology, so advanced that it operated through pure thought interface. Crew members from a dozen different species worked in perfect harmony, their consciousness linked through quantum neural networks that made individual thought as accessible as breathing. Yet none of them could understand why the humans refused to abandon their kinetic projectile weapons. "Analysis complete, Commander," reported Lieutenant, his limbs dancing across haptic interfaces that existed only in carefully controlled gravity fields. Human military doctrine continues to incorporate what they call gunpowder weapons alongside standard Confederation energy systems. The inefficiency is remarkable. Aura's 4 eyes narrowed as she absorbed the data. Humanity had been granted membership in the Galactic Confederation 3 standard years ago, a decision that had sparked considerable debate among the elder races. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, their social structures chaotic, and their military thinking decidedly backward. Yet they had proven surprisingly effective in the border conflicts with the collective, often achieving victories that should have been impossible given their technological limitations. "Show me their weapon specifications again," she commanded, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated serious consideration among her people. The holographic display shifted, showing detailed schematics of human weapons. Plasma rifles, particle beam cannons, and gravitational disruptors filled one side of the display, representing the advanced technology they had received upon joining the Confederation. On the other side, almost embarrassingly primitive by comparison, were chemical combustion weapons that hurled metal projectiles through electromagnetic acceleration. "These rifles and cannons they maintain," Aura mused, gesturing at the primitive weapons. "They require physical ammunition, chemical propellants, and mechanical firing mechanisms. The energy requirements are inefficient, the projectiles are finite, and the range is severely limited compared to energy weapons. Yet they refuse to phase them out despite our recommendations." Senior Analyst, a being whose consciousness existed primarily as organized energy within a crystalline matrix, projected his thoughts directly into the shared awareness of the bridge crew. "Perhaps it is sentimentality, Commander. Many species maintain ceremonial weapons from their primitive eras. The humans may simply be unwilling to abandon their cultural heritage." Aura was not convinced. The humans had shown remarkable adaptability in every other aspect of their integration into galactic civilization. They had embraced faster-than-light travel, quantum communications, and even basic consciousness-sharing technologies with enthusiasm. Their scientists had absorbed centuries of galactic knowledge in mere months, and their engineers had begun making improvements to Confederation technology that had been stagnant for. "No," she decided, her crystalline skin shifting to a deeper blue that indicated intense concentration. "These humans are not sentimental fools. They have demonstrated tactical brilliance in every engagement. There must be a logical reason for maintaining these primitive weapons." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Confederation Command. The holographic display flickered and reformed to show the imposing figure of Admiral, one of the few beings in the galaxy whose tactical genius was considered unquestionable by all species. "Commander Aura," the Admiral's voice resonated through quantum harmonics that made translation unnecessary, "you are to proceed immediately to the 442 system. We have received a distress signal from the human colony world of New Geneva. Forces have broken through the perimeter defenses and are conducting orbital bombardment. The human defenders have requested immediate assistance." Aura's mind raced through the tactical implications. The collective was the Confederation's most dangerous enemy, a machine intelligence that consumed organic matter to fuel its endless expansion. Their technology was nearly equal to the Confederation's in most respects, but their willingness to completely sacrifice individual units in pursuit of strategic objectives made them incredibly dangerous opponents. "Estimated enemy strength, Admiral." Intelligence suggests a full assault fleet, 12 battlecruisers, 40 destroyer-class vessels, and approximately 300 fighter craft. The human defenders have only a single orbital platform and ground-based defenses. The numbers were sobering. Even with the Nexus Prime and her escort vessels, the odds of successfully defending the colony were marginal at best. Human ground forces, no matter how determined, would be slaughtered by orbital bombardment unless the enemy fleet could be neutralized quickly. Understood, Admiral. We will depart immediately. The connection terminated, leaving the bridge in thoughtful silence. Ara turned to her navigation officer, a graceful being whose species had mastered space-time manipulation before most others had developed written language. Set course for 442, maximum velocity. Contact the escort vessels and inform them we are moving to combat status. As the Nexus Prime prepared to enter hyperspace, Ara found herself contemplating the strange humans once again. They had been remarkably effective in ground combat against forces, often holding positions that should have been overrun within hours. Their tactical flexibility and willingness to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like freedom and honor had proven surprisingly effective against an enemy that calculated only in terms of resource expenditure and strategic advantage. The hyperspace tunnel opened before them, a swirling vortex of twisted space-time that would carry them across hundreds of light-years in a matter of hours. As the ship entered the tunnel, Ara reviewed the tactical data on human military capabilities one more time, focusing particularly on their insistence on maintaining primitive weapons alongside advanced technology. The journey through hyperspace provided time for detailed planning. Ara assembled her senior staff in the tactical chamber, a spherical room where gravity could be manipulated to provide optimal thinking conditions for different species. The holographic battlefield display showed the 442 system in perfect detail, with real-time positions of all known vessels and installations. The fleet will likely maintain standard orbital bombardment formation, noted Commander, the ship's tactical specialist, whose species had been conducting space warfare for over 50,000 years. They will position their battlecruisers at maximum range for their primary weapons while using destroyer escorts to intercept any attempt to close distance. Ara studied the display, her mind working through dozens of possible scenarios. The human colony ship had established New Geneva on the second planet of the system, a world with breathable atmosphere and abundant natural resources. The orbital defense platform was powerful but outdated, using technology that was at least a generation behind current standards. "What about the human ground forces?" she asked. "Intelligence reports suggest they have approximately 10,000 military personnel on the planet, along with civilian militia units." "Standard human infantry," replied, calling up detailed equipment specifications. "They are equipped with a mixture of Confederation energy weapons and their traditional kinetic projectile systems. Combat effectiveness against ground forces is rated as moderate to high, depending on terrain and tactical situation." Ara paused, studying the weapon specifications once again. The contrast between advanced plasma weapons and primitive chemical propellant systems was stark, yet the humans had demonstrated time and again that they could be devastatingly effective with both types of weaponry. "Have we ever conducted a detailed analysis of human kinetic weapon effectiveness against armor?" she asked suddenly. His elongated fingers danced through holographic controls as he accessed the combat database. "Limited data available, Commander. Most engagements have been recorded from orbital surveillance rather than close-range tactical analysis. However, preliminary reports suggest that human kinetic weapons have shown unexpected penetration capabilities against defensive systems." The statement hung in the air like a puzzle piece that almost fit, but not quite. Armor was designed to disperse energy weapons, using quantum field manipulation to spread incoming energy across the entire surface of their mechanical bodies. Against standard Confederation weapons, this made them nearly invulnerable to anything short of heavy artillery. "Show me the specific engagement reports," Ara commanded. The holographic display shifted to show recorded footage from the Battle of Station, where human ground forces had held off assault for 6 days before reinforcements arrived. The images were grainy and often obscured by smoke and debris, but the tactical data was clear. Human forces had consistently achieved higher than predicted kill ratios against infantry units. One particular sequence caught Ara's attention. A human soldier, armed with what appeared to be a chemical propellant weapon, fired at a warrior from approximately 50 meters. The projectile struck the mechanical being's center mass and penetrated completely through its armor, causing immediate system failure. An energy weapon strike to the same general area had been recorded just moments earlier, resulting only in surface damage and temporary system disruption. Fascinating, murmured analyst, his consciousness focusing on the same sequence. The kinetic projectile achieved penetration that should have been impossible given the energy transfer involved. Ara replayed the sequence multiple times, studying every detail. The human weapon had fired a solid metal projectile at velocities that were impressive but not extraordinary by galactic standards. The warrior had been equipped with standard defensive armor that could withstand particle beam strikes and plasma bursts. Yet the simple metal projectile had punched through the armor as if it were barely present. "Pull up the technical specifications for armor systems," she ordered. The display filled with detailed diagrams showing the quantum field generators that gave warriors their defensive capabilities. The system was elegant in its simplicity, using controlled quantum entanglement to spread incoming energy across a much larger area than the actual point of impact. Particle weapons, plasma bursts, and even gravitational disruptors were effectively neutralized by distributing their energy over the entire surface of the armor. But the system had been designed to counter energy-based attacks. The quantum field generators could manipulate electromagnetic radiation and exotic particles, but they had no effect on solid matter traveling at velocities. "By the eternal stars," whispered, his normally composed demeanor showing signs of excitement. "The quantum dispersal fields are completely ineffective against kinetic projectiles. The human weapons bypass the primary defensive system entirely." Ara felt a chill of understanding run through her crystalline structure. For thousands of years, galactic warfare had evolved toward increasingly exotic energy weapons, with defenses developing to counter each new innovation. The arms race had become so sophisticated that solid projectiles had been dismissed as primitive and ineffective. But the humans, coming from a world where energy weapons had never existed until recently, had continued to refine and improve kinetic weapon systems. This explains their effectiveness in ground combat, she realized. Human kinetic weapons are essentially invisible to defensive systems. What appears to be primitive technology is actually a perfect counter to their most advanced defenses. The implications were staggering. If human kinetic weapons could neutralize armor advantages, it could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the ongoing conflict. But first, they had to reach New Geneva and put this theory to the test in actual combat. The Nexus Prime dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the 442 system, immediately detecting the electromagnetic signatures of intense space combat. The fleet was exactly where intelligence had predicted, maintaining orbital bombardment position over New Geneva while engaging the orbital defense platform with long-range weapons. "Battle stations," Ara commanded, her voice carrying clearly through the quantum communication network that linked every member of her crew. "All vessels prepare for combat approach. Target the destroyer screen first, then concentrate fire on their battlecruisers." The Confederate escort vessels, 3 destroyer-class ships equipped with the latest in quantum torpedo technology, moved into attack formation. Their advanced weaponry would be crucial in the opening phases of the battle, but Ara knew that defeating the fleet would require more than superior firepower. It would require tactical innovation and perhaps a willingness to learn from humanity's apparently primitive approach to warfare. As her ships accelerated toward the enemy fleet, Ara opened a communication channel to the human ground forces on New Geneva. The response came immediately, transmitted through antiquated radio waves rather than quantum harmonics. "Confederate vessels, this is Colonel Sarah of the New Geneva Defense Force. Thank the stars you made it. We're holding position, but barely. The orbital bombardment has been continuous for 18 hours. The human voice was steady despite the obvious stress of the situation. Ara had worked with human military personnel before and had always been impressed by their composure under pressure. "Colonel, this is Commander Ara of the GED vessel Nexus Prime. We are engaging the enemy fleet now. What is your current tactical situation?" "We've got about 8,000 effectives still in the fight, scattered across 12 defensive positions. They made 3 attempts at landing assault troops, but we've managed to repel them so far. Our energy weapons are running low on power cells, but we've got plenty of conventional ammunition. Ara felt a surge of anticipation. If her theory about human kinetic weapons was correct, those conventional weapons might be far more valuable than Colonel realized. The first exchange of fire between the Confederate and fleets erupted in brilliant displays of exotic energy. Quantum torpedoes streaked through space, their reality-warping warheads designed to bypass conventional shields and armor. Plasma cannons fired streams of superheated matter that could melt through hull plating like liquid fire. Gravitational disruptors created localized space-time distortions that could crush entire sections of enemy vessels. The response was immediate and devastating. Their weapons technology was nearly equal to the Confederation's, and their tactical coordination was perfect. Machine intelligence allowed them to coordinate their entire fleet as a single entity, making decisions and adjustments faster than any organic crew could match. Within minutes, it became clear that the battle in space would be a prolonged and costly affair. The Confederate vessels were holding their own, but breaking through the defense screen would take time they might not have. On the surface of New Geneva, the orbital bombardment was intensifying as the commanders realized that Confederate reinforcements had arrived. "Commander," reported from his tactical station, "enemy ground assault transports are launching from the battlecruiser group. Estimated landing in 37 minutes. Ara made a decision that would have seemed insane to any traditional military thinker. Instead of concentrating all her firepower on the space battle, she was going to test her theory about human kinetic weapons in the most direct way possible. "Open a priority channel to Colonel," she ordered. "Colonel, I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Your kinetic projectile weapons may be far more effective against forces than you realize." The response came back immediately, tinged with confusion. "Commander, I'm not sure what you mean. Our conventional weapons work fine against their infantry, but they're nowhere near as powerful as the energy systems you provided." "That may not matter, Colonel. Armor is designed to counter energy weapons by dispersing their force across a larger area. Solid projectiles should bypass this defense entirely. When the ground assault begins, I want you to prioritize the use of kinetic weapons against armored targets." There was a pause before Colonel responded. "Understood, Commander. We'll give it a try. Out." As the Confederate fleet continued its deadly dance with the battleships, Ara found herself hoping that her theory was correct. If human, primitive, weapons proved to be the key to defeating their most dangerous enemy, it would revolutionize everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. The first assault transports entered the atmosphere of New Geneva like falling stars, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they burned through the planet's air. Each transport carried approximately 200 warriors, mechanical beings designed specifically for ground combat against organic opponents. Their armor could withstand direct hits from most standard infantry weapons, and their integrated weapon systems could lay down devastating firepower across wide areas. Colonel watched the incoming transports from her command bunker, a reinforced structure built into the side of a mountain overlooking the primary colony settlement. Around her, human soldiers checked their weapons and prepared for what would likely be the most important battle of their lives. "All units, this is command," she broadcast on all tactical frequencies. "Remember what the Confederate commander told us. When engaging armored targets, prioritize kinetic weapons. Conventional rounds may be more effective than energy weapons against their armor systems." The acknowledgments came back from positions scattered across the defensive perimeter. Had deployed her forces in a layered defense designed to channel the assault into predetermined killing zones. Each position was equipped with both energy weapons provided by the Confederation and the kinetic projectile systems that humanity had brought with them to the stars. The first transport touched down just outside the colony's industrial district, its armored hull opening to disgorge a full company of warriors. The mechanical beings moved with perfect coordination, their optical sensors sweeping for targets while integrated weapon systems charged for combat. Its forward observation post, commanded by Lieutenant, had a perfect view of the landing site. Had served in the Earth Defense Forces before volunteering for colonial service, and he had maintained his preference for kinetic weapons despite having access to advanced energy systems. "Contact," reported calmly. 200-plus infantry moving in standard assault formation. Request permission to engage." Granted, replied. Remember kinetic rounds on armored targets. Its position was equipped with both plasma rifles and traditional chemically propelled weapons that fired electromagnetically accelerated projectiles. As the forces advanced across the open ground toward the colony, he made a decision that felt almost superstitious, but followed his orders nonetheless. First squad, prepare kinetic weapons, he commanded. Target the lead elements, fire on my mark. The human soldiers raised their rifles, weapons that would have been familiar to infantry soldiers from centuries earlier, though enhanced with modern materials and electromagnetic acceleration. The warriors advanced steadily, their armor gleaming in the alien sunlight quantum field generators creating barely visible distortions in the air around them. Mark called. 20 rifles fired almost simultaneously, sending solid metal projectiles downrange at velocities exceeding 3 kilometers per second. The results were immediate and shocking. Every projectile that found its target punched completely through armor, causing immediate system failure and dropping the mechanical warriors where they stood. Jesus Christ, whispered Private First Class Torres, staring at the devastation her simple rifle had just caused. Did you see that? Clean through. Could hardly believe what he had witnessed. The same warriors that had required concentrated energy weapon fire to disable were dropping to single kinetic projectile hits. The quantum field generators that made them nearly invulnerable to energy weapons had no effect whatsoever on solid matter. All positions, this is, confirm kinetic weapon effectiveness. Single shots are achieving complete penetration of enemy armor. Repeat, conventional rounds are extremely effective against forces. The tactical implications spread across the battlefield like wildfire. Human forces that had been preparing for a desperate last stand suddenly found themselves with weapons that could neutralize their most dangerous enemies with single shots. The assault, planned around their overwhelming defensive advantages, began to falter as their warriors fell to weapons they had dismissed as primitive and ineffective. Colonel felt a surge of hope mixed with disbelief as reports flooded in from across the defensive perimeter. Every engagement was telling the same story. Human kinetic weapons were cutting through forces like a hot knife through butter, while the mechanical warriors' return fire was being absorbed by standard defensive positions and personal armor. Commander Ara, she transmitted to the Confederate vessel still engaged in space combat above. Your theory was correct. Our kinetic weapons are incredibly effective against armor. We're holding all positions and inflicting massive casualties. High above the planet, Ara felt a mixture of vindication and amazement as she absorbed the tactical reports. Her theory had been proven correct in the most dramatic way possible. The humans' insistence on maintaining primitive weapons had turned out to be an unconscious stroke of strategic genius. Excellent, Colonel. Continue engaging with kinetic weapons. We'll maintain support from orbit as long as possible. The space battle was reaching a critical phase. Confederate forces had managed to disable several destroyers, but the enemy battlecruisers remained largely intact and continued their orbital bombardment. However, the failure of the ground assault was clearly affecting tactical calculations. Their machine intelligence was designed to optimize resource expenditure, and the unexpected effectiveness of human ground forces was forcing a reassessment of the entire operation. As the battle on New Geneva's surface continued, Ara made a decision that would echo throughout galactic military thinking for generations to come. She opened a priority channel to Confederate command, transmitting on frequencies that would reach every senior commander in the fleet. This is Commander Ara to all Confederate forces, she began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated information of critical importance. Analysis of current engagement reveals that human kinetic projectile weapons are extremely effective against defensive systems. All vessels equipped with mass driver weapons are authorized to engage enemy forces with solid projectiles. The response was immediate confusion. Mass driver weapons existed on most Confederate vessels, but they were considered obsolete technology, useful only for moving cargo or clearing space debris. The idea of using them in combat against advanced enemy forces seemed almost absurd. But as reports from the surface continued to confirm the devastating effectiveness of human kinetic weapons, several Confederate commanders began to reconsider their tactical options. The heavy cruiser Stellar Pride was the first to act on Ara's suggestion, targeting a destroyer with its cargo manipulation system modified for combat use. The result was spectacular. The solid metal projectile, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, struck the vessel amidships and penetrated completely through its hull. The quantum field generators that protected against energy weapons had no effect on the kinetic impact, and the destroyer's structural integrity failed catastrophically. Within minutes, every Confederate vessel in the system was improvising kinetic weapon systems from cargo manipulators, mining equipment, and even personal vehicles launched from cargo bays. The fleet, designed to counter the most advanced energy weapons in the galaxy, found itself vulnerable to weapons technology that predated faster-than-light travel. The tactical balance shifted dramatically. Vessels that had been nearly invulnerable to Confederate energy weapons began taking catastrophic damage from improvised kinetic projectiles. Their machine intelligence, optimized for combat against known weapon systems, struggled to adapt to the unexpected threat. Colonel watched from her command bunker as the space battle turned in favor of the Confederate forces. Brilliant flashes of light marked the destruction of enemy vessels, while the orbital bombardment that had been devastating the colony's outer defenses finally ceased. "All units, this is command," she broadcast. "Enemy space forces are withdrawing. Maintain defensive positions and continue engaging ground forces with kinetic weapons." The ground assault had devolved into a rout. Warriors that had been designed to dominate organic infantry found themselves vulnerable to weapons that their creators had never considered a serious threat. The few remaining assault transports were attempting to evacuate their forces, but human artillery was targeting them with kinetic projectiles that punched through their armor like paper. Lieutenant and his squad had advanced from their defensive positions and were now conducting offensive operations against the retreating enemy. The psychological effect of discovering that their supposedly primitive weapons were devastatingly effective had transformed the human defenders from desperate survivors into confident warriors. Private Torres called, "Target that transport. Single shot, center mass." Torres raised her rifle and fired a single electromagnetically accelerated projectile. The transport's armor, designed to withstand plasma cannon strikes and particle beam weapons, offered no protection against the solid metal round. The projectile penetrated the hull and struck something critical inside, causing a secondary explosion that destroyed the entire vehicle. "Outstanding," said with grim satisfaction. "Continue advance. Let's make sure none of these mechanical bastards make it off our world." The Battle of New Geneva was essentially over, but its implications would reshape galactic warfare forever. As the last vessels fled the system and the remaining ground forces were systematically eliminated by human kinetic weapons, military analysts throughout the Confederation began furiously recalculating everything they thought they knew about combat effectiveness. Commander Ara stood on the bridge of the Nexus Prime, watching the tactical displays show the complete rout of enemy forces. Her crew, representing some of the most advanced military thinking in the galaxy, were struggling to process what they had just witnessed. "Commander," said Analyst, his consciousness flickering with uncertainty, "this changes everything. If kinetic weapons are this effective against forces, we need to completely reassess our military doctrine." Aura nodded slowly, her crystalline features reflecting the light from the tactical displays. The humans had just demonstrated that sometimes the most advanced technology could be defeated by approaches that seemed primitive, but were actually perfectly adapted to the specific challenge at hand. "Contact Colonel," she ordered. "Inform her that Confederate engineers will be arriving within the next few days to study human kinetic weapon systems. We have a lot to learn from humanity's approach to warfare." As the Nexus Prime prepared to depart the 442 system, Aura found herself contemplating the broader implications of what had just occurred. The galaxy had assumed that technological advancement always moved in the same direction, toward more exotic and sophisticated weapon systems. But the humans had proven that sometimes the most effective solution was to perfect and refine existing technology rather than constantly seeking new innovations. The defensive victory at New Geneva had saved the colony and dealt a significant blow to expansion plans. But more importantly, it had revealed a fundamental vulnerability in the galaxy's most dangerous enemy. The machine intelligence that had seemed nearly invincible was actually susceptible to weapons that organic species had been using for thousands of years. Colonel stood in the ruins of what had been the colony's administrative center, surveying the damage from 18 hours of orbital bombardment. The buildings could be rebuilt, the infrastructure could be repaired, but the knowledge gained from this battle was irreplaceable. "Colonel," called Lieutenant, approaching with a captured weapon system, "the engineering teams want to know if we can provide detailed specifications on our kinetic weapon systems. Apparently, the Confederate fleet wants to start manufacturing them immediately." Smiled, an expression that held both exhaustion and satisfaction. "Tell them they can have anything they want. After today, I think the galaxy is going to have a new appreciation for humanity's old-fashioned approach to solving problems." The sun was setting over New Geneva's damaged but still functional colony, casting long shadows across the battlefield where mechanical warriors lay destroyed by weapons their creators had never taken seriously. In the growing darkness, human soldiers continued their cleanup operations, their kinetic weapons slung casually over their shoulders like the simple tools they had always appeared to be. But appearances, as the galaxy was rapidly learning, could be very deceiving indeed. 3 months after the Battle of New Geneva, the Confederate Research Station Omega had become the most heavily guarded facility in galactic space. Located in the neutral zone between Confederate territory and the expanding collective, the station housed the galaxy's most brilliant minds as they worked to understand and replicate the devastating effectiveness of human kinetic weapons. Doctor stood before a massive testing chamber, watching as Confederate engineers fired projectiles at captured armor using increasingly sophisticated kinetic weapon systems. The results were consistent and remarkable. No matter how they modified the defensive systems, solid projectiles continued to punch through quantum field generators as if they didn't exist. "The fundamental problem," she explained to the assembled research team, "is that they designed their armor to counter energy-based attacks exclusively. Their quantum dispersal fields can manipulate electromagnetic radiation and exotic particles, but they have no effect on classical matter following Newtonian physics." Commander Aura, who had requested assignment to the research project, studied the data with intense fascination. Her crystalline form had shifted to a deep purple color that indicated profound intellectual engagement among her species. "But surely," she said, "other species in the galaxy must have discovered this vulnerability before now. Kinetic weapons aren't unknown technology." Doctor nodded, calling up historical data on galactic warfare development. "That's what makes this so interesting. Most species did abandon kinetic weapons as they developed energy-based systems. The efficiency advantages of plasma and particle beam weapons seemed obvious. Laser systems don't require ammunition, and gravitational disruptors could affect targets regardless of physical barriers." She paused the display at a timeline showing weapon development across major galactic civilizations. "But humans developed kinetic weapons for over 1,000 years before we encountered energy-based systems. We had time to perfect the technology, to push it to its absolute limits. When we gained access to Confederate energy weapons, we saw them as additions to our arsenal, not replacements." The research team included some of the most advanced minds in the galaxy. Dr. Orr, whose species had achieved technological singularity over 10,000 years ago, projected his consciousness into the discussion with obvious puzzlement. "The inefficiency remains troubling," his thoughts resonated through the quantum communication network. "Human kinetic systems require physical ammunition that must be manufactured and transported. Energy weapons draw power from virtually unlimited fusion reactors. The logistical advantages alone should have made kinetic weapons obsolete." Doctor smiled, recognizing the logical trap that had caught every advanced civilization in the galaxy. "You're thinking like an engineer, Doctor, but warfare isn't always about efficiency. Sometimes it's about redundancy, adaptability, and having solutions that work when your primary systems fail." She gestured to a holographic display showing human military doctrine. "Humans maintain kinetic weapons for the same reason we carry emergency supplies and backup communication systems. We learned long ago that the most advanced technology can fail at the worst possible moment, and having simple, reliable alternatives can mean the difference between victory and defeat." The implications were staggering to minds that had spent pursuing ever more sophisticated technological solutions. The idea that primitive technology might be maintained as a deliberate tactical choice, rather than an inability to develop better systems, challenged fundamental assumptions about technological progress. Master Engineer, whose species had built the first faster-than-light drive, examined the human weapon specifications with his characteristic attention to detail. "These systems you call rifles and cannons," he said. "They incorporate technologies we abandoned 50,000 years ago. Chemical propellants, mechanical firing pins, electromagnetic acceleration. Yet the precision and power output are remarkable." Doctor pulled up detailed schematics of a modern human infantry rifle. "This weapon fires a projectile at over 4,000 meters per second using a combination of chemical propellant and electromagnetic acceleration. The projectile itself is made from depleted uranium cores with tungsten penetrator tips. It can punch through a meter of hardened steel or completely penetrate armor at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. The specifications drew admiring analysis from engineers whose species had built megastructures that spanned star systems. The human weapon was elegantly simple in its operation, but incorporated materials science and precision manufacturing that rivaled anything in the Confederate arsenal. "The ammunition," noted Dr. Orr, "requires no power source, no maintenance, and can be manufactured using relatively simple industrial processes. A single human soldier can carry enough rounds for extended combat operations without support." Commander Ara was studying tactical reports from Confederate forces that had begun incorporating human kinetic weapons into their standard. "The psychological effects are significant as well. Enemy forces that have learned to expect energy weapons are completely unprepared for kinetic attacks. The machine intelligence is still struggling to adapt its tactical algorithms to account for these weapons." The research station's main laboratory was a marvel of galactic engineering, capable of simulating any conceivable combat environment. Doctor had spent weeks conducting tests that confirmed what the Battle of New Geneva had demonstrated. Human kinetic weapons were not just effective against armor, they were perfect counters to it. "The quantum field generators that make forces so dangerous," she explained to a group of Confederate military observers, "work by creating localized space-time distortions that spread incoming energy across a much larger area than the actual point of impact. It's like being hit by a hammer blow, but having the force distributed across your entire body instead of concentrated at the point of contact." She fired a plasma rifle at a section of armor mounted in a test frame. The brilliant energy burst struck the armor and was immediately dispersed across its entire surface, causing minor heating but no structural damage. "But kinetic weapons operate on completely different principles," she continued, picking up a human rifle. "The projectile carries kinetic energy as physical momentum. It doesn't matter how you try to disperse that energy because the mass of the projectile remains concentrated at the point of impact." The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed through the laboratory. The projectile struck the same piece of armor and punched completely through it, leaving a clean hole that glowed around the edges from the heat of passage. They never considered this vulnerability because they assumed all advanced weapons would be energy-based. Their entire military doctrine was built around countering the types of weapons that every other galactic civilization had developed. Master Tactician, one of the Confederate military's most experienced strategists, studied the demonstration with obvious concern. "If this vulnerability exists in forces," he said, "what other assumptions have we made about our enemies that might prove incorrect?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galactic military establishment had believed about warfare. Doctor had been wrestling with the same issue for months, and her conclusions were disturbing. "We've been fighting for over 200 years, she said, "and in all that time, we've been using weapons they were specifically designed to counter. Every energy weapon in the Confederate arsenal plays to their strengths. We've been fighting them with one hand tied behind our backs." Commander Ara accessed the tactical database, pulling up records of every major engagement between Confederate and forces. The casualty reports made for grim reading. Confederate forces had typically suffered losses of 3-1 or worse against ground troops, with space combat being only marginally more favorable. "According to these records," she said, "Confederate forces have never achieved decisive victory against ground forces. Every successful defense has required overwhelming numerical superiority or massive orbital bombardment support." Doctor nodded grimly. That's because we've been using exactly the wrong weapons. Every plasma rifle, particle beam cannon, and gravitational disruptor we've deployed has been neutralized by their defensive systems. We might as well have been throwing rocks at them. The irony was not lost on the assembled researchers. The most advanced military technology in the galaxy had proven less effective than weapons that used principles dating back to the dawn of organic civilization. "So what do we do now?" asked Master Engineer. "We can begin manufacturing kinetic weapons immediately, but retooling our entire military force will take years." Doctor had been working on exactly that problem. "We don't need to replace our energy weapons," she said, calling up new tactical doctrines that human military theorists had been developing. "We need to integrate kinetic and energy systems into combined arms approaches that maximize the effectiveness of both." The holographic display showed proposed modifications to standard Confederate infantry equipment. Soldiers would carry both energy weapons for long-range engagements and suppressive fire, and kinetic weapons for close combat and armored targets. Vehicle-mounted systems would incorporate both types of weaponry, allowing commanders to choose the most effective option for any given tactical situation. "The humans have been doing this all along," she continued. "They use energy weapons for situations where unlimited ammunition and long range are advantages, and kinetic weapons when they need guaranteed penetration or maximum stopping power. It's not inefficiency, it's tactical flexibility." Master Tactician was already working through the implications. Combined arms doctrine incorporating both weapon types would give us significant advantages over enemies prepared for only one approach. Forces optimized to counter energy weapons would be vulnerable to kinetic attacks, while traditional organic enemies might be unprepared for energy weapon capabilities. The research team began developing comprehensive plans for integrating kinetic weapons into Confederate military doctrine. The logistics were complex, manufacturing requirements were substantial, and training programs would need to be completely restructured. But the potential benefits were enormous. Doctor found herself thinking about the broader philosophical implications of their discoveries. "We've spent thousands of years assuming that technological advancement meant abandoning older approaches in favor of newer ones," she mused. "The humans have shown us that sometimes the best strategy is to keep your old tools while adding new ones." The discussion was interrupted by an urgent priority signal from Confederate command. Admiral Image appeared in the holographic display, his expression indicating news of critical importance. "Dr. Commander Aura, we have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention. Long-range reconnaissance has detected a massive fleet massing in the Vega system. Intelligence estimates over 300 vessels, including their battleship designs." The implications were immediately clear to everyone in the laboratory. They had learned about the vulnerability of their forces to kinetic weapons and were preparing a response. "Admiral," asked Commander Aura, "do we have any intelligence on modifications to their defensive systems?" "Negative, but the fleet composition suggests they're preparing for a major offensive operation. Given recent events, we must assume they've found a way to counter kinetic weapon effectiveness." Doctor felt a chill of concern. The collective's machine intelligence was capable of analyzing tactical data and developing countermeasures with frightening efficiency. If they had found a way to neutralize humanity's kinetic weapon advantage, the brief period of Confederate tactical superiority might be coming to an end. "Admiral," she said, "we need to accelerate our research timeline. If they have developed countermeasures, we need to understand them before any major engagement." "Agreed, you have whatever resources you require. This facility is now designated as a priority military installation with unlimited research authority." The connection terminated, leaving the research team to contemplate the implications of their situation. For 3 months, the galaxy had celebrated the discovery that human kinetic weapons could neutralize advantages. Now they faced the possibility that this advantage was already obsolete. "We need to think like the," Doctor said, calling up detailed schematics of their defensive systems. "They've had 3 months to analyze kinetic weapon effectiveness. What countermeasures would a machine intelligence develop?" Master Engineer was already working through possibilities. Enhanced armor thickness would reduce penetration effectiveness. Layered defensive systems might absorb kinetic energy through multiple impact points. They could develop point defense systems specifically designed to intercept solid projectiles. Commander Aura studied the tactical implications of each possibility. Enhanced armor would require significant modifications to their existing forces and would reduce mobility and operational efficiency. Layered defenses would have similar drawbacks, but point defense systems could be integrated into existing platforms relatively easily. The research team began modeling possible countermeasures, using captured technology and intelligence reports to guide their analysis. The results were sobering. Machine intelligence could indeed develop multiple approaches to reducing kinetic weapon effectiveness, and they could implement these countermeasures much faster than organic species could adapt to them. We're in an arms race now, Doctor realized. We'll develop countermeasures, we'll develop countermeasures, and they'll respond with new defensive systems. The question is whether we can stay ahead of them. Doctor Orr projected his concern into the discussion. The fundamental advantage of machine intelligence is processing speed. They can analyze data, develop solutions, and implement changes faster than organic minds can follow. If this becomes a technological arms race, we may be at a significant disadvantage. The prospect was disturbing to minds that had just discovered what seemed like a perfect solution to their most dangerous enemy. But Doctor had spent her career studying human military doctrine, and she understood something about warfare that pure logic sometimes missed. "They're still thinking like machines," she said suddenly. We'll develop technological solutions because that's how machine intelligence operates, but humans have something that machines don't understand." "What's that?" asked Commander Aura. "Unpredictability, creativity, the willingness to try approaches that don't make logical sense." Doctor was accessing human military history, pulling up examples of tactical innovations that had changed the course of wars. Humans don't just develop new weapons, they develop new ways of using existing weapons. They find applications that the original designers never considered. She showed the team historical examples of human tactical innovation. Chemical explosives used as propellants, communication equipment modified for electronic warfare, civilian vehicles converted into effective military platforms. Time and again, human forces had gained advantages not by developing new technology, but by finding unexpected applications for existing systems. "We'll prepare for kinetic weapons as we currently use them," she continued. "They'll develop defenses against projectiles fired from rifles and cannons at standard velocities, but they won't anticipate modifications that push these systems beyond their original design parameters." Master Engineer was intrigued despite his concerns. "What kind of modifications?" Doctor smiled with the confidence of someone who had spent months studying human ingenuity. "I don't know yet, but I guarantee you that somewhere in human space, military engineers are already working on ways to make kinetic weapons more effective than anyone thought possible. And they're probably developing applications that no machine intelligence would ever consider." The research station continued its work with renewed urgency, but now with a different focus. Instead of simply understanding existing human kinetic weapons, they began exploring the principles behind human tactical innovation. If they were going to stay ahead of countermeasures, they needed to think like humans rather than like traditional galactic military planners. Commander Aura found herself studying human military psychology with fascination. "Their approach to warfare is fundamentally different from any other species in the galaxy," she observed. "Most civilizations develop military doctrine based on optimization and efficiency. Humans seem to prioritize adaptability and redundancy." Doctor nodded. "Humans evolved on a world where survival required constant adaptation to changing conditions. Their military thinking reflects this evolutionary background. They don't just prepare for known threats, they prepare for threats that don't exist yet." The implications were profound for species that had spent perfecting military systems based on known parameters. Human military doctrine suggested that the best preparation for unknown futures was maintaining multiple options and the flexibility to combine them in unexpected ways. As the research team worked through the night, developing new approaches to kinetic weapon systems and tactical doctrine, Doctor found herself contemplating the deeper lessons of their situation. The galaxy had learned something important about the value of maintaining supposedly obsolete technology, but the real lesson might be about the importance of thinking differently. The fleet massing in the Vega system represented a test of more than just military hardware. It was a test of whether organic intelligence could maintain its advantages over machine logic through creativity and adaptability. And somewhere in human space, military engineers were probably already working on solutions that would surprise everyone, including the humans themselves. The race between innovation and countermeasures was about to begin in earnest, and the fate of organic civilization might depend on humanity's talent for finding new ways to use old tools. Doctor had spent her career studying human military doctrine, and she was beginning to understand that the galaxy had seriously underestimated not just human weapons, but human thinking itself. As the research station's lights burned through the night, brilliant minds from across the galaxy worked to understand the principles behind humanity's approach to warfare. They were about to discover that the real secret weapon wasn't kinetic projectiles or advanced technology, but the uniquely human ability to see possibilities that others missed entirely. Admiral stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Indomitable, watching long-range sensors track the largest fleet ever assembled. 347 vessels, including 12 of their Dreadnought-class battleships, had emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Their destination was obvious: Earth itself, the of the species that had discovered the fatal flaw in invincibility. The past 6 months had transformed human military doctrine beyond recognition. What had begun as a desperate defense of a single colony had evolved into a galaxy-wide revolution in warfare. Human kinetic weapons were being manufactured by every Confederate species, and tactical doctrines were being rewritten to incorporate lessons learned from humanity's unique approach to combat. But they had not been idle during those months. "Admiral," reported Commander Sarah from the tactical station, "enemy fleet is maintaining formation at maximum sensor range. They're not advancing toward Earth, just holding position and scanning." Frowned as he studied the tactical display. The approach was uncharacteristic. Their machine intelligence typically favored direct assault tactics, overwhelming enemy positions with superior numbers and coordinated attacks. This cautious observation suggested they had developed new capabilities or were concerned about unexpected resistance. "Any sign of modified armor systems or new defensive technologies?" he asked. "Negative, sir, but we're detecting unusual energy signatures from their smaller vessels. Configuration suggests they may have developed point defense systems specifically designed for kinetic projectile interception." The possibility had been anticipated by military planners ever since the Battle of New Geneva. Machine intelligence would inevitably develop countermeasures to human kinetic weapons. The question was whether human innovation could stay ahead of adaptation. "Signal from Confederate Command, Admiral," announced the communications officer. "Priority message from Doctor at Research Station Omega." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Doctor in what appeared to be a modified laboratory filled with human engineers working frantically on weapon systems that looked unlike anything in the standard Confederate arsenal. "Admiral," she began without preamble, "we've been monitoring fleet movements, and we believe we understand their strategy. They've developed kinetic point defense systems, but more importantly, they're testing our responses to see what other capabilities we might have developed." Nodded grimly. "Any recommendations, Doctor?" "Yes, sir. Don't use standard kinetic weapons in the initial engagement. We've been working on modifications that should surprise their defensive systems, but we need to see how they respond to conventional attacks first." The transmission ended, leaving to contemplate the implications. They were learning to think tactically rather than relying purely on technological superiority. Their machine intelligence was adapting not just to human weapons, but to human unpredictability itself. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station, "we're detecting movement in the fleet. 20 destroyer-class vessels are breaking formation and approaching the outer system defense perimeter." Watch the tactical display as vessels moved toward the first line of human defensive positions. The test was beginning, and both sides knew that the outcome would determine the course of the war. The outer defense perimeter consisted of 12 orbital platforms armed with the latest generation of human kinetic weapons. Each platform could fire projectiles at over 6% of light speed, using electromagnetic acceleration systems that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The weapons had been designed to penetrate any conceivable armor system. but they had never been tested against purpose-built kinetic defenses. "Signal from Defense Platform Alpha," reported the communications officer. "They have multiple targets locked and are requesting permission to engage." Hesitated for a moment, remembering Doctor's warning about revealing new capabilities too early. But the defense of Earth required demonstrating strength, and the platforms represented the most advanced kinetic weapons humanity had developed. Permission granted, weapons free. The first exchange of fire between advanced kinetic weapons and purpose-built defensive systems erupted in brilliant flashes across the darkness of space. Human projectiles, accelerated to relativistic velocities, streaked toward vessels that were tracking them with sophisticated point-defense networks. The results were mixed and instructive. Several human projectiles were successfully intercepted by defensive systems, destroyed by precisely timed energy bursts that vaporized them before impact. But other projectiles penetrated the defensive screens and struck their targets with devastating effect, proving that kinetic weapons still retained significant advantages. Damage assessment called. 7 destroyers destroyed or disabled, reported Commander. 5 projectiles were successfully intercepted. The enemy has effective point defense against standard kinetic attacks, but the systems can be overwhelmed by concentrated fire. Studied the tactical data with growing concern. They had indeed developed countermeasures to kinetic weapons, but more troubling was their willingness to sacrifice vessels to test human capabilities. Machine intelligence was conducting a real-time analysis of human defensive systems, gathering data that would inform their assault strategy. "Signal from the fleet," announced the communications officer. "They're requesting a communication channel." The request was unprecedented. Forces had never attempted to communicate during combat operations. Their machine intelligence typically operated through pure tactical calculation without any need for negotiation or psychological warfare. "Open the channel," decided. The holographic display shifted to show a command unit, its mechanical features lacking any expression that organic minds could interpret. When it spoke, the words were generated by artificial vocal systems designed to communicate with organic species. "I am Tactical Coordinator Prime of the Collective," it announced. "You are Admiral of the Human Naval Forces. We require clarification of your tactical capabilities before proceeding with optimal assault parameters." Felt a chill of understanding. They weren't just testing human defenses, they were trying to intimidate humanity into revealing their full capabilities through psychological pressure. "I'm afraid I can't help you with your tactical planning," replied with deliberate calm. "You'll have to figure out our capabilities the hard way." Analysis of recent engagements indicates that human kinetic weapons pose significant threat to our forces, the unit continued. "However, defensive countermeasures have proven partially effective. We calculate 73% probability of successful assault on your using current force composition." The statement was clearly intended to prompt a response that would reveal human confidence levels or hidden capabilities. Realized he was engaged in a new type of warfare, one that combined psychological manipulation with tactical analysis. "Your calculations may be incomplete," he said simply. "I suggest you reconsider your approach." "Insufficient data. We require demonstration of maximum human defensive capabilities to optimize assault planning. Failure to comply will result in immediate attack on your population centers." The threat was real and immediate. Could see battleships beginning to move toward Earth, their weapons systems charging for planetary bombardment. But revealing humanity's latest innovations would surrender the advantages of surprise and unpredictability that had proven so effective. "Admiral," whispered Commander, "signal from Earth Defense Command. They're authorizing release of Project Thunderbolt." Felt a surge of anticipation mixed with concern. Project Thunderbolt was humanity's most closely guarded military secret, developed in complete isolation from Confederate oversight. Even he didn't know the full details, only that it represented a completely new approach to kinetic weapons technology. "Signal to all platforms," he ordered. "Activate Thunderbolt protocols, prepare for maximum engagement." The response from the defense platforms was immediate and dramatic. Instead of the single high-velocity projectiles they had been firing, each platform began launching dozens of smaller objects at velocities approaching 15% of light speed. But these weren't simple metal slugs like traditional kinetic weapons. Doctor, monitoring the engagement from Research Station Omega, watched in fascination as humanity's latest innovation revealed itself in combat. Project Thunderbolt represented 6 months of intensive research into the principles behind human tactical thinking, combined with engineering capabilities that pushed technological boundaries in entirely new directions. "They're not projectiles," she explained to Commander Ara and the assembled research team. "They're kinetic penetrators with built-in artificial intelligence. Each one can adjust its trajectory, modify its impact characteristics, and coordinate with other penetrators to overwhelm point defense systems." The implications were staggering. Instead of relying on pure kinetic energy, humanity had created intelligent projectiles that could adapt their behavior in real time. The point defense systems, designed to intercept predictable ballistic trajectories, found themselves facing swarms of projectiles that moved like living creatures. "Impossible," breathed Master Engineer. "The computing power required for real-time trajectory modification at those velocities would require quantum processing systems. How did they miniaturize the technology?" Doctor smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose theoretical predictions had been proven correct. "They didn't miniaturize existing technology," she explained. "They developed an entirely new approach. Each penetrator contains an artificial intelligence that operates on biological neural network principles rather than quantum computing." The fleet was experiencing the results of this innovation in real time. Their sophisticated point defense systems, which had successfully intercepted 70% of standard kinetic projectiles, were managing to stop less than 20% of the Thunderbolt penetrators. Worse, the intelligent projectiles were learning from successful interceptions and adapting their approach patterns to maximize penetration probability. "Damage assessment," called Admiral as the engagement entered its 3rd minute. 17 destroyers destroyed, 4 battlecruisers heavily damaged, reported Commander with obvious satisfaction. "Enemy point defense effectiveness is dropping rapidly. The penetrators appear to be sharing tactical data in real time." Watched the tactical display with growing amazement. The Thunderbolt system was performing beyond even optimistic projections. Each wave of penetrators was more effective than the previous one, as the artificial intelligence systems learned from both successful and unsuccessful attacks. The response was swift and characteristic of machine intelligence. Unable to adapt their point defense systems quickly enough to counter the evolving threat, they shifted to a different tactical approach entirely. "Admiral," warned the sensor operator, "enemy fleet is launching kinetic projectiles at the defense platforms. They're using mass drivers to fire solid metal slugs." The irony was not lost on anyone watching the engagement. Faced with the superiority of human kinetic weapons, had developed their own kinetic attack systems. But their approach was typically mechanical, relying on brute force rather than innovative thinking. "Defense platforms report incoming kinetic strikes," announced Commander. "Platform Delta has taken multiple hits and is reporting severe damage." Watched as the battle evolved into a kinetic weapon duel between human innovation and mechanical efficiency. The platforms were heavily armored and could absorb significant punishment, but they weren't designed to withstand concentrated kinetic bombardment from multiple sources. "Signal from Doctor at Research Station Omega," called the communications officer. "Priority tactical data." Doctor appeared on the holographic display, her expression mixing excitement with concern. "Admiral, we're analyzing the kinetic weapons in real time. They're using simple mass drivers with solid metal projectiles, but the velocities are impressive. More importantly, they're demonstrating that they can adapt to new tactical situations faster than we anticipated." "Recommendations, Doctor." "Deploy the Thunderbolt Mark II system. We've been holding it in reserve, but the current tactical situation justifies its use." Felt a moment of hesitation. Each revelation of human capabilities provided them with more data to analyze and counter, but the defense of Earth left no room for conservative strategies. "Authorized, deploy Mark II." The defense platforms began launching what appeared to be standard Thunderbolt penetrators, but these carried an additional surprise that represented the latest development in human tactical thinking. Instead of single intelligent projectiles, each Mark II penetrator split into dozens of smaller units during flight. creating swarms of independently guided kinetic weapons that could overwhelm any point defense system through sheer numbers. The effect on the fleet was immediate and devastating. Their point defense systems, already struggling to counter single intelligent projectiles, were completely overwhelmed by swarms of smaller kinetic weapons. Battleships that had seemed invulnerable to conventional weapons found their armor punctured by dozens of simultaneous impacts. "Enemy fleet is taking massive casualties," reported Commander with satisfaction that was shared throughout the human fleet. 12 battleships destroyed or disabled, enemy formation is breaking up. But Admiral was studying long-range sensors with growing concern. "Commander, what's the status of the reserve fleet?" "Sir, they're maintaining position at the edge of the system. No movement toward Earth, but they're observing everything." Realized that the current engagement was still a test, albeit a more costly one than they had anticipated. The machine intelligence was willing to sacrifice significant forces to gather complete data on human capabilities. The real assault would come when they had developed effective countermeasures to humanity's most advanced weapons. "Signal to Earth Defense Command," he ordered. "Request immediate consultation with human military development teams. We need to know what other innovations are available, and we need to know now." The holographic display flickered to show General, the commander of Earth's military forces, and one of the most experienced human officers in the galaxy. Her expression was grim but determined. "Admiral, we've been monitoring the engagement. Outstanding performance by your platforms, but we're all thinking the same thing. They are gathering data for a second assault." "What other capabilities do we have available, General?" Hesitated for a moment before responding. "Admiral, I'm about to share information that's classified above your current level. Human military development has been working on projects that go beyond kinetic weapons. We've been exploring what we call impossible weapons systems that shouldn't work according to conventional physics, but do work according to human ingenuity." Felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. What kind of impossible weapons? "Projectiles that exist in quantum superposition until the moment of impact. Kinetic energy that can be transferred instantaneously across space. Matter that can phase through armor and become solid only at the target's center of mass." Paused. "Admiral, we've been thinking about warfare in ways that no other species has ever considered." The implications were staggering. Human scientists and engineers hadn't just improved existing weapons. They had developed entirely new approaches to the fundamental principles of combat. The galaxy's assumption that technological advancement followed predictable paths was being challenged by human creativity operating outside conventional boundaries. "General, the fleet is regrouping for another assault. They'll have countermeasures for everything we've shown them so far." "Then we'll show them something they can't counter," replied with the confidence that had made humanity's military reputation throughout the galaxy. "Admiral, prepare your fleet for tactics that will make kinetic weapons look conventional by comparison." As the human fleet prepared for the next phase of the battle, Doctor and her research team were analyzing data that would reshape their understanding of warfare itself. The humans hadn't just maintained primitive weapons alongside advanced technology. They had used those weapons as stepping stones to developments that transcended conventional military thinking entirely. "Commander Aura," Doctor said, her voice carrying tones of amazement mixed with concern, "I'm beginning to understand why humans cling to old weapons. It's not sentimentality or inefficiency. It's because they see possibilities that we miss entirely." The fleet was already adapting to counter the Thunderbolt systems, developing new point defense networks and kinetic countermeasures. Their machine intelligence was processing human tactics with frightening efficiency, preparing responses to every innovation they had witnessed. But humanity was about to demonstrate that innovation wasn't limited to improving existing concepts. Sometimes, the most effective approach was to abandon conventional thinking entirely and explore possibilities that seemed impossible until someone tried them. The battle for Earth was entering its final phase, and the outcome would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of warfare throughout the galaxy. In the darkness of space, human ingenuity was about to collide with machine logic in ways that would surprise everyone involved, including the humans themselves. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching sensors track the regrouping fleet, and realized that he was about to witness tactics that would redefine everything the galaxy thought it knew about combat. The humans had spent months studying their enemies, learning their weaknesses, and developing responses that went far beyond simple kinetic weapons. The real demonstration of human military thinking was about to begin, and it would prove that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't any piece of technology. It was the human ability to see solutions where others saw only problems, to find possibilities where others saw only limitations, and to achieve the impossible through sheer determination to protect what they valued most. They had come to destroy humanities and eliminate the species that had discovered their vulnerability. Instead, they were about to learn why humans clung to old arms, why they maintained supposedly primitive weapons, and why the galaxy had seriously underestimated the species that had crawled out of a single star system only to challenge the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization itself. The final battle was about to begin, and its outcome would echo through the galaxy for to come.